Last night, protesters in Belfast hurled explosives across so-called peace walls. Earlier, a bus was hijacked and set on fire. Police said over 50 officers have been injured.
To understand what's happening in Northern Ireland, we need to go back 100 years. In 1920, during the Irish War of Independence, the British Parliament enacted the Government of Ireland Act, which split the island into two self-governing areas, Northern and Southern Ireland. Southern Ireland, with a majority Catholic population, would go on to achieve full independence and become the Irish Free State, and later change their name to the Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland, however, which had a majority Protestant population loyal to the British Crown, chose Home Rule and remained a part of the United Kingdom. The people who wanted to be part of the UK were called the Unionists, and they were mostly Protestants. In the 1920s, they numbered about 1 million people and were centered around these areas. The part of the population who wanted to unite with the Republic of Ireland were called the Nationalists, and they were mostly Catholics living in these areas. The Catholic-Protestant divide in Northern Ireland had little to do with theological differences, but instead was grounded in culture and politics. In the decades that followed the World Wars, Nationalists held little political power in Northern Ireland and were constantly marginalized by the in-power Unionists. They faced persistent discrimination when it came to housing allocations and were constantly overlooked for government jobs over their Unionist peers. Use of the Irish language was suppressed and schools were banned from teaching Irish history. It was even illegal to fly the Irish flag. All this resentment simmered under the surface and reached a boiling point in the 1960s. Inspired by the protests in the US and Eastern Europe, Ireland became subject to a civil rights movement aimed at fair treatment for the marginalized Protestants. Unionist supporters accused the civil movement as a facade by the Nationalists, who they said were secretly scheming to start a revolt and lead Northern Ireland to reunite with the South. Tensions grew in the 50s and 60s, and this new wave of civil rights protests turned violent, and things escalated.
It's hard to explain the sense of bewilderment one feels on seeing the open sore of Belfast for the first time. For anybody, it's an unforgettable experience. For another Irishman, it's choking in a way.
While the majority of Catholics and Protestants did not support the use of violence, the terrorist campaign fought by Republicans and Loyalists and the government's stance of counter-terrorism by the use of British Army meant that the Northern Ireland conflict became defined by widespread violence. Over the span of 3 decades, 3,500 lives were lost and many thousands injured. By the mid-1990s, however, a tentative ceasefire was signed with the aim of creating a new devolved government for Northern Ireland. The multi-party peace talks that followed resulted in the Good Friday Agreement. Signed in April 1998, the agreement consisted of 3 sections. The first provided for the creation of the Northern Ireland Assembly, which would be an elected body responsible for most local matters. The second was an institutional arrangement for cross-border cooperation on a range of issues between the governments of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The third called for continued consultation between the British and Irish governments. The Good Friday Agreement also included articles and clauses for unity and equality. It also has a clause for calling a referendum, as in a vote, to decide Northern Irish unification with the Republic of Ireland. Although this was an important clause, it didn't seem to matter too much at that time, since both the UK and the Republic of Ireland were part of a larger entity called the European Union. Borders between the two countries were practically non-existent, until
Every hour made the pattern clearer. You can see it on the map. England and Wales voting to get out of the EU, London and the suburbs voting to stay, and Scotland and Northern Ireland overwhelmingly pro-EU. Just before dawn, the BBC calls it.
The British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
Brexit created a crisis at the Irish border. For the first time in decades, there was now a hard border separating Northern Ireland and the rest of the island. Since Northern Ireland wasn't part of the EU, it created the question of free trade and movement between the two countries. After multiple rounds of talks and two British governments later, the UK and the EU signed the Northern Ireland Protocol, which put the customs border on the Irish Sea and allowed free trade within the island. This angered the Unionists, who felt that the central government was distancing themselves from the issues in Northern Ireland. They argued that the new barriers with Britain and Northern Ireland are harmful to the Union. On the other hand, European Union wants to protect their customs borders and are reluctant to make further concessions than they originally agreed to. In any case, the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol hasn't been smooth, and people on both camps have voiced their discontent. On the economic side of things, imports from the Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland are up 40% from last year. It is under these circumstances that talk of reunification has resurfaced. The Irish nationalists have always been supportive of reunification, but surveys suggest that opinion in highly unionized neighborhoods are changing as well, especially among the younger generation. Next major election for Northern Ireland is in May of 2022. All major political parties are readying themselves to align with the best approach possible. But whether all this will go through, whether the Northern Ireland Protocol will be successful, or will the UK ditch the agreement, only time will tell.